The Cuban Missile Crisis was the closest that the world ever came to nuclear war in October of 1962. However, modern perceptions of the event are altered by political strategy, myth, and memory. To understand these perceptions, we must first study what sparked the event, the Bay of Pigs. With Cuba being only 90 miles away from the coast of Florida, Kennedy feared Castro's overthrow of the dictator Batista and his close relationship with Khrushchev would inspire communist uprisings in the States. Thus, the Soviet influence in Cuba, he felt, had to be contained. He inherited Eisenhower and the CIA's plots to invade the island, which included training Cuban exiles to take down Castro. But these plans did not go into effect until the Bay of Pigs invasion in April of 1961. The invasion failed miserably, with 1,200 out of 1,400 CIA-led exiles surrendering and getting imprisoned. Because of the invasion attempt and other CIA plots like Operation Mongoose, Castro called on Khrushchev for protection against the U.S. In the summer of 1962, they secretly agreed to establish bases for nuclear missiles to deter another U.S. invasion, and Khrushchev wanted to balance the U.S.'s missiles established in Turkey within range of Moscow. In October, an American major photographed the construction of launch sites, thus sending the Kennedy administration into a panic, as they saw placement of nuclear missiles as an offensive threat to America. This discovery, as a result of America's strategy of interference using the Monroe Doctrine, or the idea that America needs to protect the Western Hemisphere, kicked off the Cold War event that would be known as the Cuban Missile Crisis.
ExComm, or the Executive Committee of the National Security Council, was established by President Kennedy to discuss the implications and courses of action needed to be taken during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Members included President Kennedy, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, John McCone, who was the director of the CIA, Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, and many more who were influential and served as advisors to President Kennedy. The overall goal of the committee was to answer the question of whether or not the United States could eliminate the Soviet threat in Cuba without starting a war. They wanted to avoid escalating the situation and therefore focused on collecting intel. This intel focused on pictures captured of missile sites in Cuba compared to previous pictures of the sites and discussed how much danger the United States was in. These meetings, most of which were secretly recorded by President Kennedy and are now mostly declassified, happened between October 16th and October 28th and were critical to resolving the Cuban Missile Crisis and avoiding nuclear war.
The resolution of the Cuban Missile Crisis is a widely misremembered event. Due to Robert Kennedy, the U.S. Attorney General, and President John F. Kennedy's younger brother's misrepresentation of the event, only more recently have historians fully understood the political strategies involved in solving the Cuban Missile Crisis. Most people believe that the Cuban Missile Crisis was resolved due to a strategy called the Trollope ploy. Named after the popular romance author Anthony Trollope, the Trollope ploy is when the recipient of a message intentionally misinterprets the message and then publicly agrees to their interpretation of the message. In this situation, many believe that Kennedy implemented this strategy by ignoring Khrushchev's first letter. This plan soon was in jeopardy due to Khrushchev sending a second letter, this time publicly. In an attempt to save face, Kennedy publicly agreed to not invade Cuba, just like the USSR wanted, though the private arrangements made in the months to come, resulting in U.S. missiles being removed from Turkey, were not mentioned.
President Kennedy's voice in his address to the nation altered memory of the Cuban Missile Crisis, leading to the perception that he single-handedly avoided nuclear war and saved the world. However, memory is also infected with nihilism and fear of World War III. This shifted the role of war in American life to one of fear rather than patriotism, even in spite of Kennedy's heroic disposition. Today, the Cuban Missile Crisis is remembered most prominently from a mythicized American perspective. The TV show Mad Men does an excellent job of displaying the influence of memory, setting the event against a backdrop of a symbolic business merger that acted as a nuclear bomb itself. The episode detailing the crisis leaves the viewer feeling suffocated by the news and shows reactions in marriage, business, and religious settings, all somewhat fearful and nihilistic.
If the world is still here on Monday, we can talk.
While nuclear war had been feared by Americans since the end of World War II, this event returned the prospect of complete annihilation to the forefront of American minds. By coming so close to nuclear war, the American psyche was permanently altered with nihilism and doom, and the memory of the event has made a lasting impression on American media.